Lesson 23, number 4. We have 2x plus star minus 2 parentheses x plus 4 close parentheses equals 3x. And so what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this with the star bringing the horizontal line out. So we're going to have 2x plus the opposite of x. And I'm going to make this subtraction plus a negative, because I like to have all of my operation signs in algebra as pluses. So I need to multiply -2 by everything that is inside of the parentheses. And remember, you need to draw the little arrows to help you remember. So -2 times x is -2x. There's a little invisible 1 in front of that x. So -2 times 1 is -2, and the x comes along for the ride. Remember, this is a multiplication. -2 times +4, negative times positive is negative. So I have plus a -8 equals 3x. I'm going to separate these two x's out into just x plus x, because 2 x's is the same as x plus x. And the reason I'm going to do that is because right next door I have plus the opposite of x. And I know that these two together combine to make 0. And x plus the opposite of x is 0. So right here I have 0. I'm going to do the same thing with these two negative or opposite of x's. It says I have 2 negative x's, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to rewrite those as plus a negative and plus a negative. And here I have this and I have this one that will combine to make a 0. So I have gotten rid of this, 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 and this. The other thing I could have done is I could have looked up here without rewriting this, and I could have said here's a -2x and here's a +2x, and these two combine to make 0, which would have just left me with this opposite of x, or -x, and that's what I have left down here. Now I'm going to add a -8, and that's going to be equal to 3x's. Now, when I look at my equation, I can see that I have numbers on the left and I have x values on both sides. I would rather have x values only on one side and numbers only on one side. And since I have numbers on this side, I am going to try to not have any x values with that number. So I am going to do, this says that I'm adding a -x, so I am going to do the opposite, and I am going to take away a -x, which ends up being adding a +x. So if you don't like thinking of it that way, just look at what is the opposite of negative x. It's positive x. And these two combine to make 0. So these are gone. But if I do that on this side, I have to do it on this side. So subtracting a negative x is the same as adding a positive x. And that means I'm left with negative 8 is equal to 4x. I've got all my x values on one side. I've got my numbers on the other side. I'm good to go. So I'm going to try and get this down to just 1x. And the way I do that is I divide both sides by the coefficient, the number that is in front of the x. And 4 divided by 4 is 1. So I have 1x left. And negative 8 divided by positive 4 is negative 2. So my value here for my x is going to be equal to negative 2, which means that the opposite of x is equal to positive 2. And my check, when I put those values back in, this is going to be a positive 2. This is going to be 2 times a negative 2. And this is plus a negative 2 times my x value is negative 2 plus 4. And that's equal to 3 times negative 2. So when I put all that back into my equation, I'm going to do parentheses first. So negative 2 plus positive 4 is going to give me 2. And so I have negative 2 times 2. So this whole part right here ends up being a negative 4. From here to here, this is a negative 4. Over here, I have negative 4, and I'm going to be adding a 2 to it. So negative 4 and positive 2 is negative 2. So I have negative 2 plus negative 4, and that gives me negative 6. And on the right-hand side, I have 3 times negative 2, and that's equal to negative 6. So my check for this one is negative 6 equals negative 6. My last problem, x minus, and I'm going to change that minus to plus a negative, and there's a little invisible 1 here. Remember, mathematicians are lazy, and so if they don't have to write the little invisible 1, they don't. But I can multiply anything by 1, so if there was a 1 there, 3x plus 1 is still going to be 3x plus 1 if I multiply it by 1. So that's why I can write that little invisible 1 there, and it changes to a negative 1. So inside the parentheses, I have 3x plus 1, close parentheses, is equal to the opposite of x minus 6. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite these problems. I'm going to be changing the subtraction signs to addition and changing the sign directly after it to its opposite. I'm going to remove the horizontal line in the x or the star and make it the opposite. So this is going to be x plus, and remember I have a little 1 there, negative 1 times, now this line is going to come out and it's going to go all the way to the other side of that 3. Otherwise it's going to look like 3 minus x. So negative 3x plus 1 is equal to negative x, move that out, and if you want to put a 1 in there you can, plus a negative 6. Now I need to start with this. I need to distribute this negative 1 through the parentheses. Whenever I am multiplying by a negative number outside of parentheses, it is going to change every single sign inside the parentheses to its opposite. Because a negative times a negative is a positive. And a negative times a positive is a negative. So when I distribute or multiply this through the parentheses, it is going to change every single sign to its opposite because this is a negative. When I did that up on this problem, it was a -2, and you'll notice that the sign on my x's changed to negative. The sign on my 4, when I multiplied it by a -2, became the opposite. It went from positive to negative. So multiplying by a negative is always going to change the sign inside the parentheses when you're using the distributive property. So now on this side, on the left, I also have this x plus, and I've simplified all of this down to 3x plus -1 is equal to -1x plus -6. Over here, I'm going to combine like terms. I have x's, so my 4x's plus my -1 is equal to my -1x plus -6. Now it looks to me I've got x's and numbers, x's and numbers. So I have more x's on this side than I do on this side. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the opposite of this x on both sides. So if I add a positive 1x to this side, this goes away. And if I add a positive 1x on this side, I'm going to get 5 x's. And I'm just going to bring down what I have left. I have 5x plus that -1 is equal to -6. Now, I've got my x's on my left, so I want all my numbers on the right. But I have a number right here. So I'm going to add the opposite of whatever this number is. So I'm going to add a +1. If I add a +1 here, I add a +1 over here. These are going to sum to 0. So I have 5 x's on one side, and on the other side I have a -5. So I'm going to divide both sides by 5 because I just want to have one x here. 5 divided by 5 is 1. X is equal to I have to divide by 5 here. -5 divided by 5 is -1. So my x is a -1. On my paper then, my x is a -1. This is the opposite of whatever x is. So this is going to be equal to 1. Back in my equation, my original equation, I'm going to use my simplified version, which is right here. I'm going to use x plus 3x plus -1 is equal to -1x plus -6. Okay, So all I did was I took this and I rewrote it over here so I can write in my values below it. So my x value is a -1 plus 3 times my x value, which is 1, plus a -1 is equal to -1 times my x value, which is -1, plus a -6. If you didn't write the -1 here, if you just have the opposite of x, you can see back on your answer sheet, the opposite of x is just 1. You would just be putting a 1 right here. You'll notice that I'm multiplying a -1 times a -1, so I get that 1 right there. Plus -6 on this side, and I have -1 plus 3 plus -1. So combining my like terms, I have -1 plus -1. That's going to give me -2 plus 3 is equal to 1 plus -6. That would be -5. So if I have -2 plus 3, that gives me 1. 1 is equal to -5. Except it's not. So what does this tell me? This tells me I did something wrong. I made a mistake somewhere along the way when I was doing my problem. And I can see right now that if this was a +3, or excuse me, a -3, I would have -2 plus -3, which would give me -5. So that means that this 3x up here probably needed to be negative. So let's look back at what I did, where I made my mistake. I have my star. I moved my star symbol out, which made that a negative. This was subtraction, so I changed that to adding, which makes this a negative. A -1 times a -3 is a +3, and a negative times a positive is going to be a negative. So that looks right. 4 x's plus a -1. I add an x to each side. Then I added 1, which gave me a -5. So x is equal to -1. I wonder if I substituted in something incorrect here. So x is -1. Oh, right here. Right there. I didn't put my -1 in for that x. So 3 times -1 is -3. So there's where it becomes negative. -2 plus -3 is -5. And -5 does equal -5. So you can see how simple it can be to miss those signs. The value of my x and my opposite of x were correct. My error was right here. When I substituted in my value for x, I forgot to put that negative sign right there. And maybe as I was doing it, you noticed that. Good for you if you did. Teachers make mistakes, and that was my mistake number 88 today. Thank you for listening.